Hello, you're watching the Media Dialogues. I'm Anuradha Sengupta. Between the vaccine rollout and the second surge, COVID-19 continues to cast its unpredictable shadow on all of us. But a year after the global pandemic disrupted business processes, social interactions, and personal lives, are we better prepared to cope with all the disruptions that it keeps throwing at us? And what are the things this experience has changed irrevocably? Accenture's India market lead Piyush Singh will assess all of that for us. The global consultancy that offers services across business functions and works across industry sectors employs over 2 lakh people here in India. Piyush, thank you very much for joining us. It's good to see you.
Rather, very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is a year after this incredibly unnerving and saddening experience of COVID-19. What would you say is your headline thought on what this experience has revealed about, the business economy and the organization of business?
To say the obvious, this is such an unprecedented event that some of the changes that we are faced with, or the challenges that are faced with, are unique. The challenges are unique and the changes are irreversible. So that's the first part, I would say. The second part, I would say, is that what it has also shown is that the resilience that our organizations and our people have, especially in the organizations that, in my view, have a deeper purpose to their being, is just well beyond what anybody would have expected. So I do think, one, irreversible changes, to the kind of resilience, both are something that I had not I would not have imagined at the start of the year last year.
So there will be a before and after COVID-19 in the way companies and businesses are organized?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is no doubt about that those organizations who are not sitting there right now thinking about how to reinvent their business models to respond to this to the whole set of irreversible changes that is in front of them, are not going to be successful in the future. Sitting here in the environment that we are, doing nothing or doing very little is not the mantra for success.
You mentioned reinvention of business model has become an imperative after the COVID-19 experience. What percentage of companies in India, in your experience and Accenture's experience, would you say are doing this?
When I sit here today across industries, and first of all, I would like to bust the myth that only some industries or particular industries are affected. I believe all industries are affected. Within every industry, there is obviously, as I said, there are going to be winners and losers. Today, when I look at structural reinvention and a concentrated effort at that is the minority part of the industry. Everybody is very concerned. Now, I don't envy a CEO's life today, right? Because they're having to deal with deep paradoxes. And so they are all deeply concerned that they must undertake the journey of reinvention. But there are a number of factors that are holding the pace of reinvention for a whole number of organizations. Number one is what I call the capital paradox. Right? Look, we are living in a world where, on one hand, there is a imperative to say you must conserve your capital, hunker down, because you don't know what levels of evil lie ahead of you. So on the other hand, if you're talking about business reinvention, no reinvention is going to happen without investment. So it is, how do you manage that capital paradox? Should I conserve capital, and then that may lead to long-term capital erosion? Should I invest capital, by putting out the right story and get my stakeholders to buy into the fact that will lead to long-term stakeholder growth?
Yes.
So that's the first part.
The capital paradox.
Yeah, the first part is the capital paradox. The second part is the organizational paradox, right? Which is, on one hand, I'm seeing my consumer preferences change irreversibly at the pace that it had not happened in the last 10 years of my life, right? On the other hand, I'm seeing technological advances that have happened at a pace that I had not seen in the last 5 years of my life. And I say 10 and 5 because generally life the speed of change of technology was faster. So we had already seen a whole lot of speed of change in the last 5 years. This has gone even faster than that. But then in the middle, I'm concerned, is my organization ready and have the ability to consume that change? Even if I put in the capital and enable that change, right? So for a CEO, there are these paradoxes that he's stuck between, that he has to navigate. And those who can navigate through this are the ones who are now on a path of reinvention. Those who are still deliberating and somehow still managing these paradoxes are slightly behind. And as I said, I empathize with them, but they are at risk.
Okay. Now, to make this digital pivot over the past year was the difference between sort of surviving and even thriving in the last year. And we saw a lot of companies do that. The fintech companies were at the forefront of that for obvious reasons. What are the other sectors where you saw the digital pivot being managed in an easier way or in an easy fashion?
First of all, the digital pivot, if you want to call it that, happened across sectors.
Yes.
Right? There's no one sector, right? And when you say the management of that digital pivot, that has only started. See, because most of the part that you've seen so far is resilience. It's stealth. Right? I mean, people went on, as a small example of internal pivot, if I can call it, people went on to Zoom meetings. That is not the same as digital collaboration. Right? Because your underlying work processes, your underlying, employee collaboration models, they were not digital. Yes, you started to talk to each other through, a Zoom meeting or a Teams like we're doing here right now, or any kind of digital platform. But that pivot has not happened yet. That reinvention of work processes hasn't happened yet. Right. So that's why I say that, the reinvention of the business model is only starting now, and organizations will have to invest heavily to make sure that there is possibly an inefficiency that has, been generated in your business model in dealing with the digital pivot with stealth so far.
Interesting.
Now the question remains, can you reinvent your business model to respond to the digital pivot with efficiency and with differentiation? Because the consumer is expecting differentiation. The consumer, as a consumer, you and I may have also accepted a level of, lack of quality.
So we've been more tolerant than we would have been ordinarily because of the circumstances.
Your choice of words much better than mine. Much more tolerant indeed.
So it's not necessarily efficient yet in the way this digital pivoting is happening.
That I can say for sure. Most organizations were not designing their business model where their primary mode of consumption of their product, their touch point, or their service was digital. We were still living in a physical predominant world with also digital, right? Now that pivot is quite drastic. That requires, as I said, relooking at capital investment structures, relooking at business model reinvention, relooking at underlying technology infrastructure. So all of those layers have to be looked at, and that was not possible to do that in the past period. And it will require a sustained level of future change. If you do not reinvent now, you will not only be under threat from those who you thought were your traditional competition, but also under threat from organizations that were traditionally not your competition.
I'm sure the kind of view that you've had at Accenture over the past year across industry sectors, across functions, must have been really quite an eye-opener. You've mentioned several times so far that consumer preferences are changing, and some of them irrevocably. I know that Accenture has been doing a COVID-19 consumer pulse research, and several things have come forward, conscious consumption, online retail growth, preference for local neighborhood shops. In the context of what consumers have been saying globally and including here in India, and given that this has been tracked over the past year, what are some of the compelling highlights that companies need to deal with immediately?
In terms of changes, there are fundamental changes that have happened, which have got both short-term implications and long-term implications. When you look at, short-term implications, they are slightly more enshrined in here and now contextual scenarios. So, for example, there are certain non-essential categories where consumers saying they're likely to reduce their spend by about up to 50%, right? But at the same time, there is likely to be an uptick in the same period on capital intensive expenditure, because the consumers are shifting that bucket, right? So there are three things happening. One, non-essential going down. Potentially what you can call capital intensive, essential or non-essential going up, and that's not necessarily that bucket going into savings, but could all go into investments. The second, more, again, in my view, as you said, irreversible one is that when I look at 2/3 and more of the consumers saying that they will prefer a digital interface rather than a non-digital interface. There is a scenario here, and rather that some of that 2/3 may come back down to just over 50%, right? Or it may, the 75% may down to 60%, but it is not going to go back to 20%, right? And the digital interface, when I talk about, see, traditionally that meant customer touch point. Now it means consumption. Look at entertainment, right? The number of or the proportions of coverage of demographics, as in different age demographics, that were not willing to go into a pure digital interface for consumption entertainment, was very high earlier, has now pivoted drastically and likely irreversibly. A non-empirical and non-research based question question that I would want to put. This is, we haven't proved, but we are looking to probe this.
Go ahead.
What happens in time, right? This is your industry. Therefore, but
I'm all ears, believe me.
So that's why I caveated, because we are still not been, our research is not conclusive on this point. But my point is, but see, why I bring that up is for you is that's the level of fundamental changes that we are talking about now. And when you look at it, when you put that change in the center of, for example, should that be the case in your industry, you imagine the level of business model reinvention that needs to happen around it.
Piyush, at Accenture, marketing as a service is something that has been prioritized as a service that Accenture offers companies and its clients. You want to tell us how the marketing function has had to be reimagined after the experience of COVID-19, given that in the past year, market access was not possible and people were focused on market access?
Marketing as a service is one thing. Being the world's largest digital agency is another. That's who we are. So we have a little more credential than it's all.
Oh, absolutely. I was getting to that. You preempted me.
The marketing function has gone from a world of building the brand to the hyper personalization of the power of one of the brand, right? Which means that the kinds of capability that the marketing function has to focus on or the bouquet of capabilities is much broader today, right? It is a lot about data. It is a lot about analytics. It is a lot about the digital footprint of your consumer. It is a lot about hyper personalization of the content that you put forward for your consumer, right? And the content for that is hyper personalized in the sense that it is not static anymore. It is all about intervention of the consumer's journey at the point of need and getting your message across. So I do think that that way the marketing functions underlying capability need, has drastically changed, and that is why we have been able to disrupt that industry so well.
You mentioned data and analytics. Is that now core to marketing? Because that's relevant to all other business functions as well, isn't it? But is the marketing function today completely based or built on data and analytics and a company's abilities on those two fronts?
Oh, absolutely. That is undoubtedly the case. So look, I mean, you have to be a data-driven organization, a whole organization. But at the end of the day, if as a marketing function, you are here to deliver experiences that define your brand. And then in today's world, my expectation as a consumer is that your experience you offer me needs to be down to the power of one. And there is no way you can do that without being extremely smart and efficient about the use of data. And I use the word smart and efficient because today we are spoiled about how much digital data I as a consumer am willing to offer to you about me.
Yes.
Right. So therefore, we have evolved, we have gone through the evolution. At first, it was about finding data about me as a consumer. Then we came to the point about using the data as a consumer. Now you are at the point where you've got excess data about me as a consumer. So how can you be smart and efficient about using that data, generating the analytics and consuming the analytics?
Sure.
A lot is lost about because people don't know how to use or consume that analytic that comes out.
You mentioned that journey of data and people providing data and companies being able to use it. I dare say that we are on the verge of another phase, which is where governments across the world come in to manage, and we see evolving regulation to manage how data is being shared, used, and offered up for commercial reasons. What are the challenges on that front? Will there be a little bit of a slowdown in the kind of growth we've seen of digital media and social media and the big tech-owned media?
I think the digital world has added another burden of responsibility on every organization, because every organization has chosen to accept data from their consumers. Protection of that data has become a burden of responsibility on all of us as organizations. Therefore, we will have to be responsible about, of building the right infrastructure to protect that data. If we don't, market forces, consumer forces will take us down. Regulation, on the other hand, is also important. I do not necessarily believe regulation will slow things down, but yes, an absence of regulation or our ability to not have an underlying infrastructure that can respond fast enough to regulation will keep organizations behind. If you are going to have this business model pivot to a digital business model, your technology infrastructure will have to change. Why? And in that, if you do not have a digitally native infrastructure, your ability to respond to security regulations, which are necessary, not excessive, but they are necessary, right? Then your ability to respond to them at pace will be missing. So as an organization, you will lose out, right? But the market will produce, if the market is functioning correctly, it will produce organizations that will respond at pace and fill that gap.
You all work and collaborate with some of the really big tech companies. In your assessment, how ready or perhaps even willing will they be to deal with the changes that government regulation will offer? I mean, we are just, a few months back, we heard Google say that they're going to turn off search in Australia, right? We had the WhatsApp new terms and conditions in India going through a government lens. So how are you seeing the ability of the big tech companies to be able to and to be willing to change with what the governments mandate around the world?
See, your question has multiple layers, Anuradha. I mean, smart question, as always, but has multiple layers playing in it. See, there's one part which you talk about the ability. Well, they are very able, right? In terms of, the work that we do with them, I can tell you that they definitely are very able and quite proactive in trying to protect consumers and to respond to regulation, right? So that is a big tick in that sense, right? There's a layer that you had about well, there are particular incidences and ongoing discussions and consultations with various stakeholders.
Of
See,
course.
that will always be the case, right? It is, of course, because there are commercial aspects involved for all stakeholders in that discussion, right? And therefore, it is a consultation process. It obviously gets a lot of media coverage because these are such big brands, and they are so much in our lives. Those episodes, in my view, are peering into the consultation that will take place quite publicly for the final outcome of where some of those government, either government or regulatory landing points come, right? I think, and then the third point you made was willingness. Yes, I do think, look, I mean, most of the big tech organizations were founded on the principle of providing a whole lot of freedom, access, right, and the principle of protection. So I do not believe that there is lack of willingness. As I said, there is going to be an ongoing consultation. There will be stakeholder interest on all sides. And that process must be quite transparent and must be fought hard by every party to come to a conclusion. And in that, as a consumer, I always hope that I'm going to be the winner.
We've been talking about other companies across industry sectors and how they've coped over the past year. Give us an insight into how Accenture has managed this past year. We've just heard and seen the results that you'll announced, and the company seems to be doing very well. What do you attribute it to?
Primary thought that comes out is compassion, right? Because we are a people organization, and our people have had to take a lot. On one hand, they have operated in quite challenging, unprecedented challenging circumstances. On the other hand, they have seen an unprecedented demand for their intellect and for their services. Yes. I mean, our results hopefully give you a glimpse into that, right? So they, on unprecedented challenging circumstances, a huge amount of demand for our services and the intellect of our people, and when I keep saying that, look, the world is disrupted and business model reinvention is required, then our thinking has also had to be reinvented. Yes. I can't go out and advise my clients if I believe that all my advice models, all my ideas were not. So they've had to reinvent their own thought processes and thinking. So, yeah, I mean, look, as a leader, my primary sentiment is gratitude, because, I sit in a business that is very successful, right? Has transformed through this itself, through this period, Yes, I did benefit as an organization that we had made some of these, requests that I'm making to others to reinvent their business model. The underlying investment we had made slightly ahead of the curve. That is why our reinvention and our enablement of this, response to the disruption was easier than some of the others. I will have to confess to that. But as I said, my primary takeaway is, yes, we have come out of this with a huge amount of gratitude to our people, because they have done a stellar job in helping our clients reinvent their businesses and provide a whole lot of compassionate service to the customer of our clients.
Right. Piyush, I'm going to let you go on those words. Compassion, trust, all of these things will be required as we navigate through these times. Thank you very much for talking to us. I wish you and your entire team at Accenture a lot of good luck.
Thank you, Radha. And I thank you for having me. And stay safe. And I look forward to meeting again soon.
Thank you. And thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18 and look out for other conversations like this one on the Media Dialogues.